Well, this is obviously going to be a little bit different, but I am going to do my best to make this as kick ass as possible. Kick his ass, ass. Just going to do the usual of sharing this on a few respective socials and get this right now. But yes, Feliz Año Nuevo, everybody. And very excited to be ringing in the new year here on a new destination for Hail to Stephen King, at least for the live show. And I'll definitely get into a few additional details here in just a little bit. But yeah, this is just part of the housekeeping of doing all of this. So have to make sure that this is actually linkable on the socials, right? But yeah, I guess here in the bit of preamble, I can specify that there is an extensive amount of reasoning for this, which I went into extensive detail during the final live show on Hail to Stephen King on the Horror Show. And it's really more so than anything because of the fact that I don't know what my schedule is going to be like going forward here in the new year, because I start school in a return to Arizona State University after, oh boy, like well over a decade since the last time I was enrolled. So I have an audio production degree under my belt, but I do not have it's just an associate's degree. And so for that reason, I have been wanting for quite a while to make my return to higher learning, and that is what is going down. And so for that reason, since I don't know how up and down my schedule is going to be, keeping a consistent Tower Tuesday thing, which is what I have done for 333 episodes, was where it came to a close, at least on the horror show. However, now with moving back to the weekends here on Saturdays on my own personal YouTube channel, that has gone neglected for a good 8-9 months because of this new work schedule with my employer that gave me the capability to even return to school in the first place. Very exciting, but it did entail having to put in 50, 60 hours a week sometimes to get eligible for tuition reimbursement through my day job. And so that really just kind of left me incapable in a lot of ways of doing a lot of reviewing, besides the horror show stuff, which we film once a week over here on the horror show, obviously. So for that reason, it just made the most sense that as opposed to throwing off the horror show algorithm and having things be a little funktastic in that regard, especially with Dylan's New Nightmare coming very soon, which is Cecil's long in development fan film sequel to Wes Craven's New Nightmare, one of the best of the Freddy franchise. And he has Miko Hughes returning as Dylan Porter. It filmed a few months ago. It's in the post-production process. It's going to be debuting later this year, most likely in late summer, early fall, depending. And that's an exciting process. But the last thing we wanted was any sort of punishment for just not keeping to a set schedule, which in the many years of YouTubing, we have most definitely realized that is the case. And so, we're just trying to keep things as consistent there as possible, since my schedule is going to be a little up in the air. But I will address that a little bit better here at the very end of this, once we get done talking about one of King's most celebrated things ever on his very extensive bibliography. Sorry, I think this is the last thing that I had to share as I'm seeing who, if any, are going to be filtering in. But for those who are watching after the fact, a grande gracias, obviously. And okay, I'll say Wordslinger. Yeah, Wordslinger, Stephen King for this gem, 40 years on. Okay, so that's cool. And okay, so there's a few that are jumping in, which is awesome. I will get to that in just a second. But yeah, that's kind of the lowdown. And I'm hoping to do here in the new year, once I get a better footing for my schedule as of Monday, which is when I'm starting at Arizona State in a film and media studies liberal arts program, pursuing my bachelor's. I already have 81 credits towards it. So very solid chunk transferred over from where I got my associates in audio production technology, applied sciences. So just have the Instagram, and then I'll be good, and we can get this started proper. Boy, the fact that there's just, okay, you got to jump to this, and then you got to make sure that you put this link and set profile and blah, 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 blah. Instagram, I know so many peeps just love it, love it, love it. But I don't know. I know it's incredibly popular, but I have kind of mixed feelings. Editing your links is only available on mobile. Wow, I had no idea that editing links is only available on mobile. That is hideously silly, but unfortunately, I'm going to do that real quick. So thanks, everybody, for bearing with. But as we jump into the discussion proper, once again, this being one of King's most celebrated works, I'm extremely excited to hear some thoughts, most notably about the two that are lesser known, being apt pupil and the breathing method, respectively. Oh, this is really just craptastic. Learning on the fly, as I knew the entirety of this process was going to entail, but getting there, man, getting there, rolling with the punches, as they like to say. Okay, and link. There we go. Erase that. Blah, blah, that. Hail to Stephen King. And then we can finally get this rock-a-lockin' proper. Because since I'm starting this a few hours late because I had to take my precious little kitty cat to the vet because she's very under the weather, so much so that we had to take her to the vet and see if she needs to get on some antibiotics. And they were trying to do a urine sample, all this different stuff. So yeah, very, very sad stuff there. Love my kitty. But yeah, so that is the low DZ. And I think we are finally ready to rock and or roll. Okay, so I unpin from profile. Okay, and I will, boy, all this different stuff. There's so much preamble. It's awful. Okay, I think we are finally done. Thank the Lord in heaven. And so yeah, that's just a little bit about the migration over here to Enfuegotainment. Trying to, in the midst of returning to school, get all of my proverbial ducks in a row. And there will most definitely at least be some King content here, and I'm hoping a solid segment of other things. So, okay, so jumping back here, and okay, coolness. Zach King says, well, let's get things started proper. All right, do it as we always did. Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers, along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if you please, you join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That is Rita, and obviously Benvenidos, but now to Enfuegotainment, where for on and off over the course, boy, I guess I'm throwing my voice out. I was super sick last week. Have to pull up Mike K from Mike's book review. Shout out to him, obviously. He gets ridiculed, apparently, for having to take a sip from a drink when you're talking for extensive amounts of time, which is just silly in my estimation. But yeah, all kinds of whack status on that. But yes, Benvenidos and welcome to Enfuegotainment, where on and off for the good part of the last 7 years, in ebbs and flows, depending on what was going on in my life and how hefty the duties were on the horror show. I like to always think of this as covering the hottest entertainment on the planet. And I mean, does it get any hotter than Sai King, my beloved El Rey? As anybody stumbling upon this can see from the Tower of Tomes behind me, Stephen King is my favorite author. And over the course of about 7 years, I started with Carrie and I went through everything in its published order. And it was quite the awesome experience because of the fact that you got to see how so many just Easter eggs and intertwinements and all of that stuff about shared universe, that King was most definitely one of the forefathers long before we were getting all of these different things from multiverses, which were so popular in 2022 with Everything Everywhere All at Once, and, to a lesser degree, Doctor Strange, and, No Way Home, the Spidey film. And so, I mean, King has been at the forefront of pop culture and just dwelling within the zeitgeist for over 40 years at this particular point. Hell, almost 50, which is crazy to think about. We were creeping close to that with this being 2023. But yeah, got to go through all of his books, and it was such an enjoyable process. And through that process, I went from being a fan of The Stand and Pet Sematary and some of the heavier hitters, the unholy trinity, as I call it, to shit, dude, just being a borderline Tower junkie. If I'm going to quote Eddie Dean in this, and as you can see by the Dark Tower comic collection right there, that omnibus that Marvel put out, yeah, I am a Stephen King just freak obsessive, but I would never call myself an expert. I always like to use the term enthusiast in comparison. And the interesting thing about this book, Different Seasons, is this is just the destination and the dwelling place of two of Stephen King's most celebrated stories ever. That being him veering away from the spooktacular and the scarific, which is how he made his name initially. But there are still people to this day that they are like, oh, Stand By Me, or, The Shawshank Redemption. King has gone on record numerous times about the fact that he had this older woman in Maine when he was at the grocery store one time. And she was like, oh, you and your old spooky tales, why can't you make good stories like The Shawshank Redemption? And if I remember the story correctly, he didn't even divulge to her, yo, that was me, check it out. I'm that versatile. I can do stuff, and, besides try to, just freak the fuck out of you. But nonetheless, exciting stuff in said regard there. To see that he wasn't just this one-trick pony. He even says at the very end of this, which I will get to at some point, he has an afterword where he discusses the fact that his editor was like, you're going to get type. And he's like, type? The hell do you mean? And he's like, well, you'll get typecast. People, if you have, your first book is about a, telekinetic, psychic, pyrotechnic to a degree, in Carrie, if your second novel, which was ironically enough initially titled Second Coming, that was retitled as Salem's Lot, which, boy, I hope we get that adaptation, even if it does suck. I still want to see it. Still no release date for that yet. But so his editor was like, yo, you're going to get typecast, and people are going to be like, oh, you're the horror guy. And he says in the afterword of Different Seasons, he's like, okay, well, some of my biggest inspirations and favorite people to read, especially growing up, they got typecast, Shirley Jackson and Richard Matheson and H.P. Lovecraft, just to name a few. And he's like, I ended up getting type, and you know what? I'm fine with it. But he still had those inclinations to write stuff that was drastically different, which is really cool. And yet I still would contend that 2 of these 4 stories are definitely horror stories, albeit only one dealing with the supernatural. And yet still it has everything that makes King so great, and that's crafting of characters and very believable dialogue. And I mean, King is about as American as, apple pie and rock and roll and all that shizzle. And so for that reason, it still feels so very Stephen King in every possible capacity. All 4 stories, even The Breathing Method, the only of these that has not been adapted, that's not based on the efforts of Scott Derrickson since an announcement in 2019 that he was trying to get it off the ground, including there was a script already prepared by, was it Scott Meeks? Shit, I would have to double check, and I'll probably get to that as I get to the 4th and final story in here. But yeah, I still contend that this is one of the best things he's probably ever put together. And ironically enough, I reviewed every single release book-wise from Stephen King on the horror show, and this was the last one. So I guess this is it's very much the final episode on the horror show of Hail to Stephen King was me just giving a proper send-off and a preview of everything happening in 2023, including with my new schedule and also some health issues that I've experienced here and there with just, man, in 2022, I don't know if besides having COVID at one point and then, just like some ear infections and like, a horrible sinus infection later in the year and like a few different things, like, it was the least healthy, I guess, in a lot of ways that I had been. And I didn't know if that was residual from getting the captain trips at one particular point or what. But So it was, the ebb and flow of just personal health, both physical and mental to a degree as well, with the stress of so many new things coming onto my plate. But yet also, scheduling stuff. And so for that reason, the farewell from this being on the horror show and then migrating over here, I guess it is rather befitting that this kind of closes the book, so to speak, on that previous incarnation of Hail to Stephen King. And that's not to say that forging forward, the coverage that I have here is really going to be that drastically different, especially with the Evergreen episodes. In the coming months, I'm going to be covering for the anniversary of when the Carrie musical initially debuted. And I'm going to be taking another look at Doomakey, 20 years later, although that I've already reviewed that. And so it's going to be a different sort of video. I'm also going to be comparing 83 to 2017, and which was the bigger year for Stephen King as far as both books and stuff on screen, both big and small. So the BBC radio dramas, I've got that in the pipeline. And so, those are a few things that there's a lot of King stuff still coming. And so it's not going to be that drastically different in a lot of ways, but it is going to be at this new home here. On Hail to Stephen King on Enfuegotainment. So just a shout out to those who have at least jumped on to say hello. Zach King says, hey, Fuego, long time, no live see. Can't stay long, but I just wanted to say congrats on the debut. I appreciate it very much, man. Say thank you. Movie Mike, evening Fuego. Hope your kitty is doing better. Well, we're getting a urine sample to get a little bit more information, as gross as that may be. And congrats on going back to school. I just got my associates in addiction studies. Okay, interesting. Tony, movie Chappie, D9, Neil Blomkamp fan. Hey, Fuego. What is up? Good, sir. Very enthusiastic introduction. I like it. Lou's reviews, different seasons. What a freaking great collection of stories. Lou from the Stephen King podcast and a collaborator of mine on a couple different things, including one of my favorite panels about Sai King that I've ever had the privilege to be a part of. Movie Mike says, yes, very much so. Apt People and Breathing Method are very horrific. Did you review Rage? Yeah, I did. That was actually shout out to my homie from Sanitation Squad, Sir Payne. That's right, bringing the pain. And yes, I actually did. And very recently, too, I think it was only a couple months ago, Jason, that I did my review of Rage. And not that it completely changed my opinion about it, but it did kind of alter my perspective a little bit about maybe it's not glorifying kids' behavior quite as much as the two previous times that I had read it. So that is on, there is well over the 333 episodes of Hail to Stephen King on the horror show. We have a playlist called Stephen King Focused Episodes. And so that's not just my solo Hail stuff. That's also anytime we did group reviews of like It 2017 and, like trailer reactions to a few different bits here and there. And so, yeah, that is a ginormous playlist over on the horror show. And obviously, if you guys, for whatever weird reason, are just stumbling upon me here, the horror show channel on YouTube, open another window and jump over there, like, share, subscribe. We just put up our review of Megan, the killer robo film that just came out yesterday, which is quite a bit of fun and had a lot more depth to its message than I was anticipating. And then tomorrow, Cecil and I are debuting our favorite horror films of 2022. So that will be going up tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, guys, let me just make sure I'm completely caught up. Jose Storms, que paso, dude? Next year is the 50th anniversary of King's career and Carrie. Yeah, I know. And that's why, as I was just trying to wrap my head around it a moment ago, I was just like, good Lord, over 4 decades. I'm like, shit, it's going to be 5 decades here very, very soon, which is just bonkers crazy. So in any event, Different Seasons was released on August 27th, I believe, 1982. So it was a few months back that it celebrated its actual anniversary proper. But since, with aforementioned scheduling and, like a few sicknesses and stuff here and there, I had pushed that to the final book of the month. So Different Seasons was technically the final book of the month for December for Hail to Stephen King on the horror show. So that's why it's starting out the new year and also kind of bookending, so to speak, the final episode on THS and then the first new Hail over here. But yeah, it was fairly well received at the time, and I think rights were being optioned pretty soon afterwards because King had already established himself at that point with Carrie, and a couple years before with the Salem's Lot miniseries. I mean, the stuff was already coming out at a pretty fervent pace, not just as far as adaptations, what was in development and what was coming through the pipeline and stuff, but also with him putting out a book pretty much every year. And yet it still kind of took some people off guard who were expecting nothing but the freaks and the frights and stuff like that. And yet this was very much a sentimental book in a lot of ways, most notably with our third story. But I love the fact that different seasons in each of the 4 seasons. And I do want to say, I love this cover art so friggin' much, this painted little bit. And, you've got, your sun and your moon and your, dying flower. And then this, like, I don't know, Mother Nature, almost like Greek gods sort of like breathing the deluge of snow onto the earth or something. And obviously you've got this really cute picture on the back with, I believe that's him and Owen, if I'm not mistaken, based on age, because Creepshow, was right about to come out or had just come out. And, Joe was, being the older brother and being in the first Creepshow. Good times. And I've got my little penny cup here, Pennywise cup. So different seasons, man. And with all 4 of these having that sort of vibe, Hope Springs Eternal being the very first one, and not just being considered one of the greatest Stephen King stories and one of the greatest Stephen King adaptations of all time. It's Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption here on the printed page, but simplified down to The Shawshank Redemption, the 1994 film starring Tim Robbins, Morgan Freeman, directed by Frank Darabont. That is considered to be one of the greatest films of all time by the AFI, the American Film Institute. And that came out in 94. I just want to double check, September 23rd. I believe a week or 2 beforehand, it had debuted at TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival. And so, it's a fairly straight adaptation. However, I will say that I contend, and it's a video I've been wanting to put together for a while, I do actually believe that the adaptation of Shawshank Redemption is one of the rare instances when the adaptation is even better than the novella. And King even gripes in the afterword here about novellas and the fact that, well, it's too long to be a short story and it's too short to be a novel, and the conundrum of all of that. And that's why he put all 4 of these together. And it's only right around 100 pages. I'm trying to recall if it's even a little bit less. I want to say it's like in the 90 range. Maybe it is just barely over a hundo. Just barely, or let me double check. No, because of the introduction. Yeah, it is less than 100 pages, or just barely below. But such effective storytelling. And I'm not here in this video, especially, with time being a little more limited, with having to go attend to some other obligations later this evening, and with my cat not feeling so good. It was, it kind of put me on a little bit more of a crunch for time. But with starting this video a couple hours later, live than I had anticipated. But it still is such relatable and such empowering against all odds, like hope springs eternal. Excuse me. I still have a little linger from the last little bit of sickness, because that's the thing, these winter colds, especially for desert dwellers like me, who have a tough time even dealing with any sort of cold temperature. We're like super wimps in that regard, which I admit to being. It's totally fine. I like these sort of things. Like, all too often when I do get sick in the colder months, it's like, oh, you get significantly better and then you kind of veer back into it. And so lots of vitamin C and bed rest, but with lots of schoolwork just looming over the horizon. Point, no rest for the wicked, as to quote Ozzy Osbourne. But I know it's not just Ozzy, but it's a damn good album. First was Zakk Wylde. Anyway, what a relatable sort of story. And the hope springing eternal about the fact that, Andy Dufresne, and the fact that he is a wrongfully accused man who just like strikes up this initial, it's not even like an acquaintance, like he's, I guess, an acquaintance initially in the character of Red, but more so than anything, like, it's a association that basically originates out of necessity, in the fact that Andy is already, as early as when he is brought in, in the late 40s, if I recall correctly, after being falsely accused. His wife was having an affair. She's diddling the tennis instructor, if I remember correctly. I re-listened to both of these after rereading this. So this is just for those who don't necessarily know. What I like to do is read in these, because these are all rereads at this particular point, anytime I'm going back to a King story, because I finished like 3 or 4 years ago doing all of the books in published order. So at this point, I like to read the text at the beginning of the month, and then I like to listen to the audio book at the very end of the month. And so just to get reacquainted right before the discussion transpires. And so for that reason, I listened to this story a few days ago. So if I like flub the tiniest little detail, cut me some slack, por favor. Be nice of you. So diddling the tennis instructor, and he sinks into this like just this dark, depressive state of drinking. And so there's motive, obviously, and yet they never found a murder weapon. And there was discussion about the fact that the night that he was drinking at this particular bar, that his wife was murdered. So, I mean, they really run with it. And, I think the DA, if I remember correctly, was trying to like run for some sort of higher office later in the year. And so for that reason, like the whole trial turned into a spectacle. And anyway, long story short, in that regard, Andy ends up in Shawshank prison. That's right, up in Maine. And anybody familiar with Sai King knows that, like Juniper Hill, Shawshank, Castle Rock, all these different places, Derry, obviously, even smaller references like, Little Big Island, Chester's Mill, whatever it may be. King has his own little, landscape that he has constructed where so many of these tales take place. And that's how all of these intertwinements that are the fun Easter eggs of reading a lot of Sai King stuff if you're a constant reader. And so, he ends up in Shawshank, which is a notorious prison that's mentioned not just in King printed stuff, but it's also been in shows like the Hulu Castle Rock TV series, which wasn't very good, but it played a hefty part in that. And so, one of the big time King landmarks, not just because of how famous the film is. And so Andy, there's a few different things he's trying to get. So over the course of the story, he gets like one of those little rock, like pickaxe kind of things, one of the tiny little ones, 2 actually, now that I remember. But the biggest and most important thing that he asks Red for is a Rita Hayworth poster. And they were occasionally, all of the inmates getting the chance to have a film screen for them. And this movie, not this movie, I'm just thinking of films, and so that's why. But this story takes place over the course of a number of decades. It's starting in the late 40s and then going all the way into the 70s. And Andy initially has what you call the sisters after him, and that's basically any gay men who either they were before or they became after the, just being locked away and the assimilation or whatever. It's kind of a touchy subject, obviously, because of the fact that, obviously I have so many, gay male friends and the entire LGBTQ community. I 100% respect, and love so many friends of mine. I mean, I worked at the Clarendon Hotel and the awesomeness that is that, very queer-centric hotel for many, many years. And yet, King being where he grew up in that age, I know it's often a touchy subject when it's, hey, gay or straight, rape is rape, man. And so the sisters are those who, if you've seen Half-Baked, fish, yeah, kind of like that. And, you don't always have Squirrel Master to protect you. And so Andy Dufresne basically made himself indispensable to the main warden at this prison. And so that's how he gained protection from the other guards, by helping with everything from, looking over investments and taxes and inheritances and all this different stuff. And so even after there's an instance where he finds out, because there's a point early on in this story where like King leaves it vague enough where it's like Andy doesn't think he killed his wife, but he's not 100%. And so there's even a line in this that I found very intriguing. So I'm the guy intriguing. So I'm the guy that can get it for you. Yeah, that's how the story actually starts, which is really great. Okay, here's the line that I was looking for. If enough people want you to remember something, it can be a pretty powerful persuader. I love that bit of dialogue that King has. It's really just internalization that Red was having. Red being our narrator, the guy who can get it for you if you need it, whether it's, a fifth of Jack Daniels that Andy would ask for from time to time, a couple instances in the year, or you want cigarettes, or you want whatever it may be, including little rock pickaxe little things, and also a portrait of Rita Hayworth, a poster to hang in your cell. But yeah, like you can tell early on that Andy isn't 100% that he's innocent. He's like pretty sure. But that line just shows maybe a bit of the internal struggle that he is dealing with, and the fact that he doesn't really know 100%. And yet he finds out later on, as he's hearing one particular inmate talking about a cellmate that he had, I believe it was at a different prison somewhere else, who was boasting about killing a tennis instructor at the same place where, the tennis instructor that killed was helping his wife, that his wife was having the affair with, and so was killed. And so this is where Andy, for the first time, like, he had the hope of escape, but I think maybe he still deep down wanted to do it the right way. And especially because of the fact that he was a very sharp, well-to-do man. He was a business dude, before that. And so he did all kinds of investments and advisements in that regard. And so maybe, deep down he wanted to, just get exonerated the right way, even though he's like, well, if all else fails, I will try to escape. And so, yeah, he presents the warden with this information, and the warden knocks him, I think, for only like the second or third time in the hole, in solitary. And yet it was very solitary for Andy throughout a lot of the story, despite the fact that he does strike up this close friendship with Red. He only had one cellmate over the course of the entire time, and it was this big Native American guy. And so that's how he was able to slowly just knock his way through some of the loose cement walling of his cell, and yet cover it up with initially the Rita Hayworth poster, and then it's a Raquel Welch poster, and I think it was a Linda Ronstadt poster by the very end, if I remember correctly. But it's just got so many great little facets to it. And even as Andy is talking about the horror of how he ended up there, he's like, I think there was a lot of bad luck floating around that night, more than could ever get together in the short span of time again. I thought that was very cathartic as well. And the fact that he's just like, man, it was like as wrong place, wrong time, like every bit of, but yet as somebody who believes in, the laws of physics and, every action and, equal and opposite reaction and everything like that, I think all too often there is a karmic sense of like, what else maybe had Andy done? I mean, and we find out in Apt Pupil, our second story, about a certain connection with a certain character that, so maybe he was a little, arrogant, or maybe his monetary dealings weren't that positive, or maybe he had been unfaithful to his wife at some point that isn't mentioned, because, Red is really only narrating it based on what he observes and how he kind of processed it. And he even admits near the end in this memoir of sorts that, a lot of this is my own theorization and whatever. So, and I mentioned the sister, so I'm just making sure I hit all the different bases, but it's such a great story. It's such an inspiring story. And I'm not going to be spoiling anything, I think, for just about anybody who has either seen the film or read the book. But the film, being at around 2.5 hours, does really expand on a lot of character development. I think it does. Whereas this is a snapshot, excuse me, of a few different instances. Yeah, man, the film expands upon a lot. One of the things that the book really does get across quite well, though, the novella, is that there is something that happens to the incarcerated for long periods of time, in the fact that they adjust and they adapt, but to their detriment, in the fact that when they get back out into society, they often don't know what in the hell to do with themselves. And Red actually finally, and he admits to the fact that the very beginning of the story, he's like, yeah, I killed my wife. He messed with the brakes or something. And yeah, he killed his wife, but he didn't know his wife was going to have picked up another woman. And I can't remember if they had a child with, or a baby, or if, the other woman was pregnant or whatever. But so Red was guilty of, multiple murders. And so after I think he said a good chunk of his life, 2/3 of his life or whatever the hell it was, he finally gets parole, and he's back out in society, and he's bagging groceries, and yet he's tripping out because he's like, this is not really, I'm not adjusting well. He's not. And there is like, despite the themes of perseverance and some of the stuff that is all too often talked about with regards to this story, I think that is another very fascinating and, dare I say, real life frightening aspect that King explores here. It's another wrinkle of the story that I feel like it's mentioned at points in the novella, but the film, especially with some of the imagery, especially where that dude hangs himself after getting out, the film does an incredibly good job of taking this source material, some of King's best writing, most relatable writing, and just most accessible writing. And so that's why, man, Shawshank Redemption kicks all kind. Rita Hayworth in the Shawshank Redemption, as opposed to, I mean, Linda Ronstadt in the Shawshank Redemption when he finally gets out. I don't know, but that's my thoughts briefly about this one. And so I just want to jump back out into the chat real quick. And okay, Zach King says, I've said this before, but I think the ending to Apt Pupil is even more disturbing than Rage. Oh, yeah, the ending of Apt Pupil, dude. Like, you have Cain rose up, and you have Rage, and then you have fucking Apt Pupil, which we are about to talk right now. And I contend it's one of the darkest and most unique things that Sai King has ever written. Totally agree, says Movie Mike. In many ways, Apt Pupil is as dark as King has ever gone. 100%. Okay, Oscar Perez says Thinner is very underrated Stephen King adaptation. I would agree. Tom Holland, director of Fright Night and the original Child's Play. Terrific friggin' job. And of course, Zach King's like, yep, Cain rose up. That's what ending wise, the two of those, it's King going back into the toolbox, right? Just a wee bit. But love to reread that one. I barely recall the story. That's Cain Rose Up is the one about the kid going through. It's very Columbine. I don't want to get this is not a monetized channel, so I don't think it's going to mess with anything. But let's hear about the short stories, says Oscar Perez. It's one of the few stories that's really hard for me to get through, says Zach King to Movie Mike. Okay, Lou says Darabont's adaptation of Shawshank is one of the rare ones that is superior to the source material. Hit that like button, peeps. Yes, thank you so very much. I appreciate the reminder. So Sitzma. Okay, Movie Mike says one difference between the book and the movie that struck me is that the movie has one warden from beginning to end, whereas the book goes through several wardens. Good call. It does. And also, well, I guess the film, it's been a little bit since I've watched the film, a couple years at least. And the fact that I know that there were sympathetic guards to a degree, or a little slightly more sympathetic guards in both of Darabont's prison Stephen King adaptations in Shawshank and The Green Mile. And so you had your complete assholes, and then you also had the slightly more sympathetic in both source material and adaptation. Okay, yep, a wise choice dramatically, but not so much in terms of realism. Brooks was here. Loose reviews, 100% agree. Okay, cool. Well, since I've already gone for almost 40 minutes, all right, it's easy to go on for a long time about Shawshank, and I could continue, but we must proceed to our second tale, which is Apt Pupil, obviously, and this one is subtitled Summer of Corruption. And yet, similar to the fact that Shawshank takes place over a number of decades. Well, actually, no, almost 3 decades, I want to say, at the end of the day, when, Andy finally escapes through the shit pipes and everything. And, just the thought of a naked convict running, because he takes off his pinstripes, too, once he finally gets out after crawling through 500 yards of shite. But anyway, so Apt Pupil is about this kid named Todd. And he discovers, so he's he wants to be a private detective. Like, he's a very sharp kid in school, great grades, mostly A's, couple B's here and there, and he's about to start high school. And when this transpires, when he first meets this guy who was a horrible war criminal from Nazi Germany who escaped into South America and then eventually went back to Berlin, almost got caught, and then made his way to the States, fake papers, all that different stuff, and has been living in suburban California, essentially, for a number of years. This kid, in his sick fascination of all of those war crimes magazines that a friend of his father had collected a significant amount of, He even puts it at one particular point. He's like, the Holocaust stuff, man, I groove on that, or I groove on it. I forget, but that's like, not verbatim, but he says he grooves on it. And it's freaking disturbing to hear that this kid at his age, and yet I have a lot of friends within the horror community who groove on that sort of stuff. I personally don't. I'm not here to denounce or judge or anything of that nature, but it's definitely kind of a thing where I scratch my head a little bit, but I'm not here once again to, judge like crazy or anything. Judge not, lest ye be judged, or what have you. But yeah, man, this story is disturbing because of the fact that not only does Todd figure out who dude is, Dufresne. No, I'm looking at something else. All right, I messed up on my note there. I was just that's where I should just say right off the bat, story 1 and 2, they intertwine for just a split second because of the fact that our Nazi war criminal, he actually had, when he was first coming over to the States, he had Andy Dufresne, our main, would you say main character? I guess he's our protagonist, obviously, but Red in some ways is our main character because he's our narrator in Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. So obviously that's up for debate amongst people. But yeah, Andy Dufresne advised our proverbial Nazi war criminal on investments when he was first coming to the States. So it's just a brief mention, but once again, it's cool to see those little interlocks between the two stories. But so what Todd decides to do is he decides to extort this Nazi criminal, and it's not money or whatever that he's trying to obtain. No, he wants to hear about the atrocities. This sick little fucker wants to hear about the nasty things, from mating dogs and women and the horrible tortures and just all of this nasty stuff. This kid wants to hear about it. And he, with the slightest little bit of arm twisting, he gets it. And this is very much one of those stories of that famous phrase, when you stare into the darkness and it's staring back into you. And the fact that our war criminal in hiding, he kind of has tamed down a little bit, and he hasn't put that part of him to rest, but has most definitely been lying dormant within him. And the downward spiral of vicious vengeance and bloodthirstiness that is it was already kind of festering within Todd's character, but in the old man, Todd reinvigorates it. He reignites it. And the path that they both go on and all of the inherent creepiness of it, Todd is, this is another one of those stories that King has done a number of at this point, going back to the toolbox, like I said. But nonetheless, it's one of those situations where, I'm reading to the old man, and so you've got the Hearts in Atlantis that's done it. And I think as recently as Harrigan's Phone, he was doing it. And so, King has used this trope a bit. But in this case, it's the opposite of, an Andy Garfield or, the kid from Harrigan's Phone's name's eluding me. But Todd is a sick little bastard. And, he just starts to get sicker over the course of the film. And not just in the fact that he looks tired and sickly and everything as he's losing sleep from the nightmares from some of these stories that he's being told. He has one in particular that's really messed up with I don't even want to say it. It involves the big R word and a strapped down woman, and both him and the old man being declothed. It's got the weird kind of sexual connotations that a guy like Bryan Singer is yeah, baby. And so I guess I'm not that surprised that he was the one that adapted this into a movie with Brad Renfro and Ian McKellen in 1998. October 23rd was when that movie was released. And, say anything you want about Bryan Singer, and there's a lot to say because he is a sick piece of shit. But it sucks because he's a very talented filmmaker. And I know it's tough for a lot of people to remove themselves from the filmmaker and all of the bad things that they have done, or the actor in the case of, someone like Kevin Spacey, who Singer worked with. But Pupil is a really strong adaptation and includes 2 stellar performances, from our leads in Renfro, rest in peace, and Ian McKellen, Sir Ian McKellen, one of the greatest actors to ever live. He's been both Magneto and Gandalf, for God's sake. So, how do you say anything beyond that but praise? And he's terrific and terrifically frightening. But it's just very interesting the way there, excuse me, the parallels between just the disgusting behavior of the two of them and the fact that with our respective war criminal, it starts out very minor with like, oh, he puts a cat in the oven. And when I was rereading this, especially having a cat myself now, and I was a dog person for many years and still am maybe at my core, but I love my little kitty, man. And reading about just putting the live cat in the oven and burning it to death like that's really hit pretty close to home, man, and just horrified me. It genuinely did. And then he's going to the pound and he's adopting dogs, and oh my God, it's messed up. But then eventually he graduates right around the same time that Todd does to killing winos. And killing winos becomes both of their thing. Todd goes and, asks them to, like, hey, if I pay you, will you buy me some alcohol? And, I'll drink a little bit of it and give you the rest or whatever. And whereas War Criminal Homie is like, he kind of plays the queer angle a little bit. Like, he's like, hey, come home and, we can drink and I'll give you a bed and a nice warm meal and whatever. But over the course of a number of years, not a couple of decades, almost 3 decades like we have in Shawshank. But it's still like this story takes place throughout, all of the years of Todd's high school life and the ups and the downs. And the ups and the downs include the fact that initially his grades start failing and his health is failing and whatever. But, old man is like, no, you were going to turn your grades around. You're going to figure this shit out. He even poses as his grandpa at one particular point and meets with the guidance counselor, played very amusingly by David Schwimmer. And it's unintentionally, I know, but I guess he did play in that Pupil, the nosy guidance counselor, fairly well. In any event, gets his grades back up, starts seeing girls, but you can tell like he is totally screwed up in the head with, his internalizations. His perspective is really warped at this particular point, but he's more successful than ever, both as a baseball player and as his academics go. He gets into Cal Berkeley, if I remember correctly, at the end, near the end of the story. And yet it all starts unraveling when you can't go just killing peeps, forever. And eventually something's going to happen. And a lot of pieces start to coalesce in, finding out not only who our old war criminal man is, but also the fact that, these murders are linked eventually to the both of them, albeit being, taking place separately. And there's also a catalyst for all of this transpiring in somebody else recognizing who the old man is, who was in a concentration camp where a bunch of his family was executed by him. And so he ends up, after a heart attack, the old war criminal, in the same hospital as somebody, with the numbers on their arm, recognizes him. It sets a lot into motion for Todd's world to come completely spiraling downward. And, one of the things that always stuck with me is the fact that the film took a different sort of ending. It did not go as full friggin' niner as the novella does, because the novella has, where Todd's character, he already has inclinations beyond just killing winos, dude. He has this gun that his father has gotten him. I think it's 30-30 if I remember. And he has these like glamorized sort of fantasies about going up on this area overlooking the highway or the freeway or something, and basically pulling what the character at the end of Cain Rose Up did from the top of the college. And so much larger scale. Maybe, I don't know if you can even quantify which is more effed up, whether it's, murder of younger kids in that, and students in that regard, or of just any rando on, that's driving their vehicle. But that's what ends up happening with Todd, is when he realizes that his whole world is spiraling down, he just decides, the hell with it. I'm just going to go do it. And the story ends so chillingly. I just want to read the little passage, because he kills the guidance counselor upon his discovery, not only of what he's been doing, but also the fact that he forged some grades and everything. And so that's obviously just utterly atrocious and stuff. But at the very end, as he is deciding, yeah, the hell with it, So he went back into the garage and he got all the shells he had, better than 400 rounds. He put them in his old knapsack and shouldered it. When he came back out into the sunshine, he was smiling excitedly, his eyes dancing. It was the way boys smile on their birthdays, on Christmas, on the 4th of July. It was a smile that betokened skyrockets, tree houses, secret signs, and secret meeting places. The aftermath of the triumphal big game when the players are carried out of the stadium and into town on the shoulders of the exultant fans. The ecstatic smile of tow-headed boys going off to war in coal scuttle helmets. I'm king of the world! Yeah, kind of puts in different perspective Leo DiCaprio and I guess now the current king of the world at the box office, James Cameron. He's attained it once again. But he shouted nightmarily at the high blue sky and raised the rifle two-handed over his head for a moment, then switching it to his right hand, he started toward that place above the freeway where the land fell away and where the dead tree would give him shelter. It was 5 hours later, almost dark, before they took him down. So you can only imagine, like, that little piece of trash went to town, and it's one of King's, people say King can't stick the landing. Boy, does he stick the landing at the end of Apt Pupil, dude. It is so much more grisly and messed up in every possible way than just about anything. And it doesn't meander. It just goes for it, man. And excellent book, novella to specify. And, also the fact that, Todd's parents in it, they have a discussion at one particular point in the story where they're like, the mother's having concern, and yet the father just kind of, he downplays it. And it makes you wonder if the parents were a little less oblivious and honestly a little more involved. Who knows what could have been averted. So I'm king of the world. Very, very interesting. And now we jump into The Body. And The Body being adapted by Rob Reiner, the meathead from All in the Family, but great director in his own right, into Stand By Me. And I'm just going to make sure when Ian McKellen puts on the Nazi uniform and starts goose-stepping, chilling, man. Most definitely. And then Movie Mike says that old man kid relationship is reflected strongly in Fairy Tale. Yep, in Fairy Tale as well. And yet another one. Sledgehammer horror. King discussing King. You're too kind, sir. Thank you so very much, man. And Zach King says after reading Apt Pupil, I always have the feeling the feelings Sniper is going to shoot. Oh God, yeah. Well, I don't blame you, man. It's such a chilling finale to this. So in continuing along with the theme of just the seasons and such different seasons being the title, Fall from Innocence. And so, excuse me. So the Fall from Innocence for The Body, adapted by Rob Reiner, into Stand By Me with a terrific cast of Will Wheaton, a slightly more rotund Jerry O'Connell, Corey Feldman, and then obviously rest peacefully, River Phoenix, lost long before his time. Terrific adaptation, and really got the sense of just the coming of age and just the adolescence of kids, but the Fall from Innocence being the fact that it's four friends who they actually have a slightly more extended crew that they hang out at this, treehouse of sorts that I've made. And as a kid that used to make forts and had a treehouse with my best friend growing up and stuff, I don't remember it like King did in 1960 because, growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was a little bit different for me. But the fact that I did grow up in a time when, we still went and played outside, and before we had these devices all in our pockets and we're constantly just linked and, just sucked up by them and all of that. I got to say, King perfectly in the text, and Rob Reiner does a splendid job in the adaptation as well. And this is another one that I don't know if I would go as far as to say that the adaptation is superior, like with Shawshank, but they're pretty much, it's neck and neck, and it accomplishes everything pretty much that the short story. I mean, I guess maybe to the slightest degree, it is a little bit superior because, the casting is spot on for all four of the boys that I just mentioned. And so terrific. And the fact that even though Ace Merrill is a little more prevalent in the feature, I guess, not Yeah, Kiefer Sutherland, great in that role. And so, yeah, but in any event, so the fall from innocence essentially entails the fact that it's the very initial signs, because the kids are all 12, and, it's like, did anybody ever have, friends as good as when they were 12? It just depends on what era of nostalgia you really like to link up upon. Some of my best memories are when I was around that age, but then again, I have some very, very pivotal ones with, my I was part of a trinity of friends, a trio, and I mean, that's when I was 16, 17, and that was like unbelievably formative, but obviously of a different era of maturation than when you're 12, and when you're discovering like these kids, you're penny gambling on cards and nudie mags and all of these cliches and cigarettes and whatnot. So it really gets across that camaraderie so perfectly in the fact that they hear about this dead body, and it's the journey of the four of them to see it. But really, it's especially upon the final discovery of this body, that's where the fall of innocence really comes into play. But also the fact that over the course of the journey, and this is very much one of those cliched stories, and I only use the term cliched because, anytime somebody's like, oh, it's about the journey, not the destination. This is very much one of those situations where I think it is about the journey and not the destination. And it's about the reflections of not just the friendship amongst all of them, but, the fact that, Vern and Teddy, and then even more so Chris and Gordy, just the distinctive difference amongst all of them. And, what we get in the aftermath of all of it, when Gordy, who is our narrator in this case, is looking back about the fact that, after this great adventure of theirs, it's, there's a lot of the body in it. I've talked with Mike K from Mike's book reviews about this many times, and various other constant readers, and the fact that I feel like the body was like the warm-up lap for it in so many different ways. It was like, okay, I'm going to take a lot of those themes and I'm going to just crank them the hell up, and I'm going to go full horror with it as well, and yet still maintain those sensibilities. And, I'm going to throw a girl into the mix too, although one of the most notorious bits about throwing the girl into the mix in it. But, it was like just kind of a warm up of sorts, him preparing himself for the epic that would be it. And yet the fact that all four of them, despite the fact that after this adventure, Chris and Gordy fall off from Vern and, and Teddy, and the fact that the two of them almost become, like they splinter off, but they become, a pair of duos in contrast in that regard. But for this particular adventure, it's most definitely one that Gordy would never forget, because this story is him writing the memoir of this particular instance in this particular summer when he was 12 years old. And the fact that each of them have their different set of problems, and the fact that, Vern has it the easiest, obviously. He's the derpiest of the trio, and he's the one who, like buries, a treasure of a bunch of savings of like pennies and stuff. And then his mom takes his treasure map and burns it with like a bunch of his funny books and comics and stuff. And so he's digging out in the, under the home a number of times. And he's the one who initially gets wind from his older brother, overhearing him while he's digging about this dead body of this kid who's around their age. And so the four boys set off to find that. But it's really when you find out about the fact that Teddy was abused, and the fact that Chris is still being abused, and yet Gordy has a different sort of abuse. And it's and I don't even know if abuse is like, it might be too strong of a word, because Gordy is experiencing the ramifications of neglect, in the fact that his just well-celebrated and beloved older brother locally, and this being a Castle Rock story, you're going to have tons of tie-ins with the fact that you have a Constable Bannerman reference, you have a Cujo reference here. You hear about the Emporium Galorium, which is Pop Merrill's place. You hear about, the Mellow Tiger. So you've got all of these cool references for those who are into everything Castle Rock and all of those intertwining sort of king things and stuff. But you also just have the fact that the town loved Gordy's older brother. He was like a sports star. I believe he was like a star baseball player, if I remember correctly. And since he was so celebrated, his parents just adored him too. And so when the mention is made that he died, before our story takes place, and that the parents are still grieving both in their own respective ways. Like Gordy's dad, tending to this garden that isn't growing and isn't doing anything. And yet, like, even back when the older brother was alive, when Dennis was still alive, like, they ignored Gordy. And now they're still ignoring Gordy. And, there's a scene when they're making their way. So they stop at the junkyard, and, they've got Commander, I think is the name of the dog, if I remember correctly, who they narrowly evade Milo and Commander. But so Gordy is the one who goes to get them supplies, like hamburger meat and like some stuff to drink and everything. And the shop owner is like, hey, you're Dennis's brother, blah, blah, blah. So even to the rest of the town, like, Gordy isn't his own person. He is in the shadow of his brother. And what makes it very inspiring in this case. So you go from one inspiring story to one disturbing story in that Pupil, and then you go to this more melancholy story in this case, in the fact that Gordy, he does break free from his brother's shadow, and he goes and forges his own destiny and path in becoming this famous writer. And you do get that amusing interlude. You get two amusing interludes, actually. One is the Chico story, which mirrors, Gordy and his own experiences, and the fact that, this guy is like a total badass, and, he's like deflowering this girl right when we first meet him. And yet then he goes home and he's butting heads with his daughter, and there's a stepmother who Chico has got down with, and so on. And so, that little interlude is interesting. I believe, if I remember, it's like the first published work that Gordy mentions that he has. And yet there's also the lard-ass story, which is one of the more amusing aspects of both the film and the novella. And that was actually a King separate thing that he had published. And so the fact that it's even presented as such, as, when it was published by Gordy's character. But the pie eating and, guzzling that weird oil, and then the puke fest that transpires, it really appeals to my inner fan of South Park and Dumb and Dumber and the toilet humor that I grew up on. And that especially in the case of males, it's fairly tough to shake that sort of stuff. But for this one, since I was driving around a lot when I was listening to it, I just want to pull up my notes here. But a pile of shit has 1,000 eyes. Teddy's character being very much the warm up for Trash Mouth. And so, that's interesting. Mentioned Vern's Missing Treasure, mentioned, as I called it, the Ballad of Chico. And the stuff with the train. I mean, you've got iconic bits that, with them, the train stare down and the bit with the leeches. I mean, both of those are, very well adapted into the film. I mentioned that, and yet there's also a lot of musings of this being, another time of King, just writing about a writer. So you get some of King's personal just thoughts and theories and fears in this case, especially since by 82, King was very well established and very renowned, albeit not by everybody. He was still getting slogged by the critics a lot of the time. But he says at one point, I look at this typewriter and if I could talk, I look at this typewriter and wonder when it will run out of good words. And you definitely believe that that's King just kind of thinking that to himself and then presenting it to his constant readers. And so it's him just revealing a fear that he obviously had personally. And so, the lard-ass stuff is silly. The slug situation, as I mentioned. Another favorite quote of mine here is that the only reason anyone writes stories is so they can understand the past and get ready for some future mortality. It's another personal favorite quote of this, that Gordy puts forward. And so, they've got the stuff with the bullies at the very end and the splintering of the friendship after seeing the body and, getting, tied in with Ace Merrill, who pops back up in both Nona and then also, I think he's only mentioned in the Sundog now that I think about it, but he was omitted from the Needful Things film. He's basically like the Igor of sorts to Leland Gaunt in Needful Things. And so, Ace Merrill having appeared in a few different King works, but not really, he's only mentioned a few times and then only has one scene where our characters actually talk and interact with him. And so, yeah, pulling the gun and scaring them away. Our 12-year-olds rising to the occasion of the older bullies and stuff. But yeah, King does that fantastic job of just, especially, having been a boy at one point, and everything. It just really, it encapsulates so much, especially even from the just trying to one up each other with the goofiness and the extravagance of the insults and the gross out aspect of it all. King hits the nail right on the head, and it has every reason, both in the written form and in the adapted form, to be celebrated as one of King's absolute best. Okay, jumping back up real quick, since we are about to start our final one. We have already eclipsed the hour point. Okay, when Family Guy thought they were so smart in thinking Ace's gang would retaliate, I'm just like, read the book. Ha ha ha. What's up, Fuego? Says Enigma 523. Yo. Okay, got a book later. Lou, thank you so very much for jumping on. Anytime, glad to be here. Righteous. Guys, Sledgehammer Horror. Him and his lady, man, do a constant bit of stuff. One of my favorite series, if you guys haven't checked out Sledgehammer Horror, Cecil and I were lucky enough to be on there and have the discussion about your first horror movie. And it's an ongoing series, not just with other like YouTube pundits and stuff like Cecil and myself, but I mean, they have had like directors and, actors within the horror sphere. Like, it's a terrific destination for all kinds of horror stuff. And so shout out once more. And okay, Movie Mike says, I never thought of that before, but I guess the kids from the body could definitely be seen as the forerunners of the Losers Club. Good call, Fuego. Thank you, sir. And I am thrilled that Rob Reiner actually included the Lard-Ass Hogan segment in the movie. I could see a lot of directors leaving that out. Yeah, specifically because of the fact that it veers into that toilet humor and stuff. And I mean, yeah, the kids are ribbing each other constantly, and it's gross out humor, like I said, with some of the insults and everything, but like to actually visualize it and put it on screen, and it shows that the movie does have a sense of humor. I'm not going to say the film doesn't take itself too seriously, because it does, but it's a nice snapshot of the fact that life isn't always about, like, even as a kid, especially the kids that have been abused, with, the case of half of these kids, it's very much like, you want to have those jovial, escapist moments from, the everyday drudgery of what's going on at home. And, having been in both romantic relationships and in friendships with, both, boys and girls growing up. And as I got into my adolescence and young adulthood and stuff, like, yeah, I had friends with really bad home situations. And I was really blessed that my parents were both, I mean, I don't see eye to eye with them politically or religiously, but I had good parents, and they're at their core, despite our disagreements, really good people. And I love them a lot. And yet I had a lot of friends who did not have that blessing, so to speak. And so for that reason, I can definitely relate to a lot that I saw. And when I would be at certain friends' houses, had the displeasure of experiencing, and witnessing. And so, it just, that's why I feel like the lard-ass stuff needed to be in there, because it showed the way these kids got their mind off of some, just some of the real life horrors, I guess, that they experienced. And so, terrific adaptation, excellent film. It was released in August 22nd of 1986, and I believe it's streaming on Paramount Plus. And you can obviously VOD it, rent it, but purchase physical media. Go out and own it if you don't. I think I own the most recent anniversary release, because just like what I do every 5 years or 10 years or whatever, how I like to do my anniversary reviews of this stuff. Yeah, they like to put out a new DVD or Blu-ray, or now it's 4Ks. And so, yeah, own that physical media. Get physical media. Shout out to Robert Meyer Burnett, one of my favorite YouTube personalities. So, all right, guys, we are now to the final segment as I wrap-a-dap it on up here on the first Hail to Stephen King of the new year at the new destination, at least for the live show. But I am going to address a few things at the very end with pertinence to that. And the final one is called A Winter's Tale. And this is the breathing method. Underappreciated because of the fact that it's the only one that has not been adapted. Okay. And yet Scott Derrickson, who most recently did the adaptation of Stephen King's son Joe Hill's short story The Black Phone, which was a big box office success, he's been trying to make the breathing method into a film for a while. He also did Sinister, and so he's very well established in the horror community. So he's been trying to make the breathing method into a film for a while. And since this deals very much with a club, I'm trying to remember if is it 249 B East, 249B East 35th. That is where in New York City, this very strange club that is also the setting for a story called The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands, which was collected, in Skeleton Crew. But it's very much this secret club, high society sort of place. And the first half of it, entitled The Club, is about this aging lawyer dude who one of the senior peeps at his practice invites him one night to go to this secret club of theirs. And he becomes fascinated with it, so much to the fact that he's like lying to his wife about going there and stuff. But it's really because he encounters not only a very eclectic and intelligent group of aging men there, but also because of the fact that it houses this library of literature that is unparalleled in the fact that he reads some things there that he finds, and like he tries to research where he can obtain his own copies and where he can, so he does extensive research at some of his own libraries, and he contacts publishers and, book collectors and all this different stuff. And there's these books are unique and no one has ever heard of them. So there is an element of mystery there about this club and the fact that it's very hush-hush secret society sort of thing. But you also have the fact that they have this, I guess you'd call him a butler named Stevens, and the story, he attends this club for many years and it never looks like dude has aged. And so there's that spooky sense about it. And but the story doesn't really get going until it's right around Christmas. And there is this aging doctor who tells the story, and it's all about the breathing method. And the breathing method is something that was apparently scoffed at in the 1930s, which is where a woman who was calling herself Jane Smith comes to this doctor. And so I had to double check when I was reading this, though, because I believe it's George Waterhouse, who is the guy who takes our main character to the secret club and introduces him to 249B. But yeah, I was like, oh, is that the guy who actually tells the story of The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands? And that short story was actually published the same year that Different Seasons came out. So obviously King had this secret society on his mind, and there was talks at one point of turning that into an anthological series for television or a streamer. It's been years since I've heard about that project. It would be dope if that was the case, or even if they could somehow fold that into Derrickson's adaptation of the breathing method. If it ever happens, maybe you could retitle it and turn it into an anthology, and you do The Man Who Shaked Hands, which is a great story. If it ever happens, maybe you could retitle it and turn it into an anthology, and you do The Man Who Shaked Hands, which is a great story as well, and maybe have a couple original stories. I'm trying to recall if those are the only two set at 249B, but in any event, it's not the same George. It is George Gregson who was the one. It would have been nice if King, made that connection, connotation, whatever, but he chooses not to. But in any event, so this aging doctor talks about the breathing method, and he went on to, so he was born in 1900 and he gets into medicine in 1926, if I remember correctly. But in the 30s, he's trying to get together this book called A Practical Guide to Pregnancy and Delivery. And so he's basically positioning himself as a, childbirth expert, and rightfully so, because he is talking about the breathing method, and that obviously became very popular in Western culture, and rightfully so. But at the time in the 30s, it was scoffed at as it's from Africa and this other part of the world, and doesn't make any sense. But when it's described as such, it really does. You start out with, very short breaths, and, when the contractions are at a different stage, and then into deeper breaths. And then as the actual child is about to come out, you alter the breathing again. So it's stuff that if you've seen anything in the modern day where, we were past the taboo of pregnancy and childbirth, because they used to not like to have that on television. That is for damn sure. But as we got into the 70s and the 80s, and we just kind of pulled the curtain back, because it is there's curtains around, when this sort of stuff is happening a lot of the time in these hospitals. And so when the curtain was pulled back and we were exploring this more, yeah, you see the breathing method on display. But so this doctor was championing it, and this Jane Smith, who he gets to eventually divulge her identity as Sandra Stansfield. So he takes it upon himself, and he's a little infatuated with her, actually, despite the age difference and everything. But she's having a tough time. She's, first and foremost, because she has become pregnant by a guy from an acting class that, they slept together, which obviously was very taboo back in the 30s. It obviously was happening, but as far as public perception goes, it was looked down upon, like premarital sex, and even more so, like having a child out of wedlock. Big no-no, dude. That's why girls would go even into the 50s and 60s and stuff up in the other states, when they got pregnant when they were teenagers or whatever, to have their children. And yet this department store worker is like, nope, I'm going to keep the child to term. And she had even said, if I remember correctly in the story, that she was going to keep it. And this is where we finally get to another horrific element. So this, it's interesting how King gives, as I said earlier, we have the very grounded, uplifting personal story, and then we have the dark, effed up story with that pupil, and then we have the more melancholy but yet slightly uplifting thing. Although the end of the body with the fate that befalls all three of the other kids except for Gordy, and the way they all die in tragic fashions is really messed up. But now, for the fourth and final installment in A Winter's Tale, we get back to the messed up stuff, So it's like one on, one off, one on, one off, kind of like what people say with the Star Trek films. And yet, yeah, man, it goes for it in the fact that Sandra is on her way to the hospital, and she's doing the breathing method in the taxi cab, and apparently it throws the driver off, so much so that he wrecks the vehicle and she gets decapitated. Yeah. And so our doctor, who's telling the tale to the rest of the 249B club, he shows up on the scene, and yet somehow she is still alive and still going through the breathing method. And so he even mentions our narrator at one particular point, because when we get to part 2, the breathing method, it goes from the younger, at least when he first joins the club, guy, it shifts narrators to the person telling the story to the rest of the group in 249B. And he essentially says, yeah, chickens will get their heads cut off and run around for a little while and stuff like that. He's like, but humans, hell no, some convulsions maybe, but that's about it. And yet somehow, some way, that is happening with this woman. And it's even creepier because of the fact that shortly before she was going to have the child, she even confides in the doctor that she has had like dreams or visions or premonitions that she is in fact going to die, and that, she's not going to be able to keep the baby to term or something like that. And it also just really explores a lot of interesting things about pregnancies and the aspect of childbirth from King's perspective and his personal research, and the fact that the theory is at least purported that women are mentally prepared for great agony in childbirth because they've had so many other women tell them how painful it was. And yet I've talked to a lot of friends of mine who have had kids, and they're just like, oh my goodness, it was like the worst experience ever, unless they got like epiduraled and everything. And so, but the whole theory of the breathing method and trying your damnedest to keep composure, it's that, he says screaming exhausts energy during childbirth. So the breathing method diverts attention and so on. And so, that's fascinating in that particular thing. But as is said a few different times near the end of the story, there's no salvation without suffering. And the salvation is for somehow this woman to be able to birth the child despite her head having come off. And the doctor shows up on the scene, accidentally kicks the head into the gutter, which is hella messed up. And yeah, she somehow has the child, and the severed head, even as he says it's a boy, like kind of returns that, like, it's a boy, this and that. So somehow, some way, by whatever otherworldly, supernatural, providential, whatever you believe or don't believe in, in King's Tale, the child is able to be birthed and goes up for adoption and becomes incredibly successful. The end of that tale. But just it's aside from that beat, it's easily the most I'm not going to say lacking, and I hate to even use the term like the weakest, but because it is also the shortest of the stories, but it is kind of one note in said regard because it is all about that situation and the payoff of, wow, the decapitation and somehow still, it's, I don't want to say a gimmicky story, but I think one note is the best way to describe this. And, at the very end, our original narrator, the, guy who was at least younger when he was initially brought into the club, and that character also mentions about various, peeps, the older ones in the 249B club, dying off over the course of his time attending there. He thinks the butler guy, Stevens, is like going to kill him at the very end as he is inquiring about the fact that, why can't I find any of these books anywhere? And I've contacted people and so on and so forth. And he thinks like the butler is like going to throw him into like some sort of, I don't know, like limbo, crazy toadash nastiness or something, but doesn't end up happening. All that Stevens says to him at the very end is, there's always more tales, and there will always be more King tales for me to cover in some capacity, whether it is of a revisiting inclination or if it's just doing something a little bit different. And King does at least have Holly books this year, and then presumably Rattlestakes, the novella, which is a follow-up of sorts, at least, to Cujo. And I'm thinking it's going to be more of like a Castle Rock epilogue sort of situation, but I still really like the breathing method, even if I don't think the story gets interesting until we get to that aging doctor telling the story of what happens with Sandra, this woman, and the payoff is very solid. And I wish that I want more tales from this particularly strange club, because you really got the vibe with King putting out 2 in the same year that he was really maybe wanting to make this an ongoing thing, or at least turn it into something bigger than just a few stories. But didn't happen, unfortunately. But I think that there is a lot to mine there, which would be really fascinating. And going forward here in 2023, it is most definitely going to be a lot of cool King coverage. It's just going to be here on Enfuegotainment, and also exploring, per the suggestion of Maddie Jorson and a few other of my industry friends, just expanding Hale to be more short form content in the in the vein of YouTube Shorts. Cecil's been very successful with TikTok stuff, so that's another bit. Also looking into starting a Discord where there can be, a lot of discussion beyond those who interact on Facebook, because I know a lot of my fellow constant readers and just great guys like Mike Kay and various others have seen significant success and really just insightful palaver, from the outlet of Discord. And so, I'm hoping in the coming days to really get a lot of that solidified. Classes start for me on Monday the 9th, and so I'm going to see how this week shakes out. But next Saturday, it will be a pre-recorded video of some sort. Most likely, it's going to finally be looking at the 2 BBC audio dramas that were done back in the 90s, I believe it was. So there was one for Salem's Lot, and then there was one for Pet Sematary. Those recently had some respective anniversaries, and I've been wanting to listen to those and just discuss the faithfulness, the quality of the voice acting. And I love audio dramas, man, and they're especially great when I'm doing some of the day job stuff and driving around and things of that nature. So very much looking forward to that. And so the King book that I will be reading in January, since now with different seasons, I have covered every single Stephen King book for Hail to Stephen King. I have made a video about every published King book and all of the uncollected stuff too, man. Like the weird shorts that have not yet been collected, and old obscure stuff that's never been collected. I mean, I've done it all through 334 episodes of Hail to Stephen King now. So the King book that I will be revisiting is this one, Doomickey. This is, I already did a video 5 years ago in the earlier days. This is the 7th year that I'm starting of Hail to Stephen King, because I began in 2017. So 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, the 7th year of this show, commencing that. And I technically started it in 2016 with his birthday special, which was like the backdoor pilot. I'm a backdoor pilot. Anyway, all right, that's my best Jim Morrison with, still the aftermath of the winter cold. Good times. But so I have yet to decide if I'm going to do another video about Doohickey, and I've already done a video 5 years ago about it, but I am definitely putting something together of the written accord, and that's really where the Discord would come into play, because of the fact that, yeah, I want to do like a read along and get other people's thoughts about what I think is one of the most underrated Sai King books, and especially because it has yet to be adapted either. And I love Doohickey. I mean, you know, Wireman is one of my favorite characters that he's ever written, man. And just the whole Phantom Limb stuff, and that, like, I don't know, and the fact that it's another one of his tales not set in Maine, it's set in Florida. So I love Doohickey. And for those who are inclined to read along, I'm going to be making some announcement on Monday about where I'm going to be covering it in either short form videos or in just like a written form of some sort. But so that is the King book that I will be reading here in the month of December. However, finally for 23, I am commencing. So last year I began a series called Barker at the Moon. Ha ha ha! And I did all 6 volumes of the Books of Blood. Other Barker that I have read is the Hellbound Heart, which was the novella that was the basis for Hellraiser. And I have also read its sequel, The Scarlet Gospels. However, I have not read any other Barker stuff. And so I found it rather befitting to start with the Damnation game. Obviously, I want to do published order proper, just like, you know, that's why I guess I did skip ahead with, you know, Scarlet Gospels. But Scarlet Gospels was, you know, that along with reading Hellbound Heart before it. That was, hey, I started, to be fair, I read Pet Sematary, then I read it, then I read The Stand, and it was with The Stand that I realized that, okay, Flag shows up in other things. And for that reason, I wanted to start at the very beginning. And so after reading a few books already, that's when I jumped many years back with Carrie and cycled through everything in published order. And so, yeah, I guess it'll be a similar journey with Barker in the fact that I've read, man, my voice was not ready for, almost an hour and a half of talking and such, with very little to like break and all that differentness. But so yeah, having read Scarlet Gospels and Hellbound Heart, I will be starting for any who want to join along with for the Barker at the Moon Book of the Month, which is going to be this baby, the Damnation game. So at the beginning of February, the first Saturday in February is when we will be talking this. And yeah, there's also going to be, you know, Run to the Hill. There's going to be some Joe Hill coverage coming up, one of which being the sequel to this baby, Basket Full of Heads. Called Refrigerator Full of Heads. Joe Hill was a story consultant on it, but he didn't actually write it. So that's another thing. So yeah, there's Barker coverage, there's King coverage coming, all going to be here on Enfuegotainment, and very excited about that. And then there will be at some point in the coming months, I'm hoping, based on like the juggling act of time, I'm hoping that I can do one of these sometime next month in February, because I'm doing these 6-week sessions for Arizona State. And so I'm hoping sometime in February, by the end of February, I can have completed the first book by one of 2 authors, okay? So I had a series last year on the horror show that I debuted, and it was called Stephen King Recommended Horror, okay? And so I did Scott Smith's The Ruins. I did not do A Simple Plan, and I guess I really need to do that, especially here on Enfuegotainment, being not just horror stuff like we will still be covering on the horror show channel going forward. And I'm still going to be very much a part of the horror show, obviously. But yeah, I want to continue with Stephen King Recommended Horror. I went through all the works of Nick Cutter and loved them. And so I'm going to start a poll here on my YouTube channel. And I'm also going to throw it on all of my respective other socials and stuff, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and on the Tale of Stephen King Facebook group as well. But I have it narrowed down to Dan Simmons or Bentley Little. So those will be whoever gets the most votes across the socials within the next week, I would say. Between now and next Saturday, I guess at midnight, I'll close it off. But I'm going to start those polls tomorrow. And so whichever you guys think would be cooler for me to cover, whether it's Bentley Little, who I found out it was Arizona recommended author by Sai King, or Dan Simmons, who I didn't know had like a lot of horror that he had done previous to like the Hyperion stuff. And so, yeah, I'm very curious what everybody thinks between the two of those. So there is still going to be a lot on the literary side of things, and I will still be getting together as often as possible to film with the horror show. But yeah, I just so very humbled and honored to be continuing this program after all of these years and getting to interact with all of you awesome people. Such great caps, such awesome palaver. And I'm going to do just one last look here on the chat before kind of calling it an evening, because I saw some people jumping on. Yep, I saw Enigma 532. Oh, Blue! Happy New Year, Fuego. Different Seasons is one of my favorite King collections. Absolutely, Blue. And, obviously, Feliz Año Nuevo to you as well, man, and to, all the awesomeness that I have on pre-order from Cemetery Dance that I'm hoping some of which will make its way to me this upcoming year. Hard for any story to compete with The Body and Rita Hayworth. Yeah, 100% Blue. And, we were talking about those earlier, and the fact that they are probably King's most respected mainstream dramatic adaptations for a reason, because of the fact that they had such capable directors and yet such terrific casts. And, great filmmaker. Yeah, across the board, two of the absolute best. Did you already explain why Hail to Stephen King is now on your channel? Michael I did. It'll have to be an abbreviated sort of explanation. With my school schedule, there was no possible way I was going to be able to maintain a Tower Tuesday. Cecil is also bringing some stuff back, including his... it's basically like a elevator pitch sort of thing, crossover shows. And also because there may be weeks where I just can't, based on the fact that I'm going back to school, just can't even do an episode. And so for that reason, and with the fact that we need as many eyes and the YouTube algorithm being as kind to us as possible going forward, it was just like, it was everything kind of aligning for the time where we need not only consistency, but, from my end, the fact that with going back to school and with, it was a rough fall as far as just like getting sick a lot more frequently in a post-COVID sort of situation for me. Good times there. But yes, going forward, the live shows for sure. And all of the, Joe Hill, if I'm covering something from him, or, excuse me, Clyde Barker, obviously. So, and the Stephen King recommended horror. That's going to be here with me now with my, pseudo channel relaunch of sorts for whatever I can do. Hoping in the next day or so, I can get together my best of 2022 non-horror, because we're putting our horror best of 2022 up tomorrow morning on the Horror Show channel. But yeah, Michael M., I talked extensively about this on the final live episode on the Horror Show. But yeah, that's it. That's it in a nutshell. I can't predict how my schedule is going to look and how much time I'm going to have. I'm going to do my damn due diligence. But yeah, as far as the availability of slots and scheduling, and also with the channel, maybe taking the Horror Show channel, taking some time away for the Dylan's New Nightmare post-production process. It was just, there was a lot of things all culminating together. So that's about all we got. Oh, Corey, what is up, man? Horns up to you, good sir. Yeah, because I'm wrapping it up right now. Congratulations on your college, my man. Couldn't be happier for you. Say thank you, man. Greatly appreciate it. Yes, love Doomickey as well. Does the end of The Mist make you angry? Doesn't make me angry. It just makes me sad, and it really depends if you're discussing a Darabont film or if you're discussing, the ambiguity that we get in the novella. I love them both, though. But it doesn't, I don't know if I would use the term angry. But, Scott Baker, that's a name that I miss. Hola, amigo. Awesome to see you still doing these. Good luck with school. Thanks very much, man. Thanks for explaining, says Michael M. Yes, my pleasure, good sir. I will be starting Weave World by Barker soon. It's fantasy, not horror, but I hear it is very good. Yeah, I have a bunch of Barker hardcovers that have been just sitting collecting dust as I look at my other bookshelf. As this is the King shelf, and I'm looking at the other one over there. So, yeah, guys, I am very excited, but I will, in fact, be wrapping it up now. But once again, a grande gracias. I have been Jaime Enfuego. You can find me on all social media sectors. Basically like Jaime, Jaime Fuego. I can make it into some silly song or whatever. But yeah, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube. The liking, sharing, subscribing, it means a hell of a lot as I'm trying to get this channel back up and going with some different content, some that is migrating over from the Horror Show. But there will be other non-horror stuff on here too, hopefully but at least a best of the year sort of stuff going down. But yes, much appreciated for those who made an appearance and gave some insight about the awesomeness that is different seasons. And yeah, tons of fun content coming here in the new year. So happy 2023, everybody. And yeah, say thank you to Sai King for the awesomeness that was different seasons. So I've been Fuego. Y'all have obviously been Rad Status. And until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, sen amigos, constant readers and viewers alike. Say thank you. Hope we have been well met. We share more of this palaver sooner rather than later. And until then, remember, yeah, I'm still going to say it. Read Stephen King. Damn Reezy. Much love, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Peace out.